But how are you? You been
I'm
good?
all right. Yeah, all good.
No,
Yeah.
excellent. No, what I wanted to actually talk to you about today was the whole thing of decolonization, because it's this
hmm
extremely like fuzzy concept that's used in often in quite pernicious ways. But I
hmm
noticed when we were talking last time that you actually see reason for its application in some sense. You see there's a virtuous application of decolonization as a cultural concept.
Oh, yes. I certainly, I wouldn't poo-poo it completely. I think there's place for it. But once again, with the proviso that people have to keep on revisiting, the historical record, and that we cannot just replace one with another and then decide that's the final story. So certainly, I think one has to keep an open mind and should be open-ended because there's always going to be, a new take on the past, and that will change. And anyone who's at least not ahistorical will realize that history has a way of repeating itself ostensibly anyhow. So you have your cycles of very far right activity. Just take for example William and Mary. I mean, suddenly when they came into power, you've got the morals coming in. You've got the Society for the Reformation of Manners. So after the Restoration, you know, they went completely the opposite direction, and then you see the persecution of homosexuals and prostitutes,
Yep.
and that sort of ends with Queen Anne. So and then next thing so you're seeing these swings historically that happen. And I think it's very important to bear that in mind. And the whole woke thing will wear out eventually. It's already starting to move, I think.
I'm not so sure about that. I mean, I think the persecutions are getting more brazen and more vicious. I mean, uh,
They
and and
are,
and
but
and, and
they are, but
it's
what counters that is as soon as it becomes so pernicious that people start getting. It's now reached the point where are you finding the right is
mm,
reacting, but now it's becoming equally dangerous because it's so easy to just use words like weaponize
yeah.
and to talk about woke, and it's a relabeling again, and people are shouting at each other, and that's the end of any discourse.
The reason I'm much more pessimistic about the West in this regard, I think South Africa might, like bits of Africa, can save themselves from this, but I don't think the West can. And the reason for my pessimism is largely from what I've seen of the power structure in, say, the United Kingdom, for example. So you look at, oh goodness, I can't remember what his office is, but I'm terrible with names and stuff like this, but the fellow who's in charge of the security policy in Scotland, and he announced this law to basically say that we're going to spy on people in their own homes and make sure that they
Mhm.
don't violate um, prescribed speech rules in the privacy of their own homes, like East German style stuff. And
Sure.
the thing is, everyone looks at these historical developments like the fall of the Soviet Union and so on, and they think, oh, well, this is natural. And I
Mhm.
think that it's becoming more and more obvious now that nothing is natural. It's all driven by whether or not you have an elite who can actually leverage material and organizational strength to direct change. And if I look at the UK now, they had a brief moment under Cummings advisory where they were moving against like this decolonization, this rabid and deranged green policies that they were using, and against the sort of like worship of blackness that's pervaded their educational system now. And what's happened is that in the last couple of weeks there was a coup in Downing Street, and basically Cummings and all affiliated advisors have been kicked out. Um, a lot of people suspect that Boris is going to renege on Brexit in some way, whether in form or substance. And it's not looking all that good. The BBC is still pumping out very, very aggressive anti-white decolonization stuff. You just look at, if you just Google decolonization and hit the news, you get like Belgium right now busy doing massive public symbolic reforms. And my question behind all of this is, when we're talking about, revisiting history, now history is always revised because there's always historians, there's always people thinking about history. But decolonization, the way that I've seen people use it and the way it seems to be understood by most people who are proponents of it, is that it is against the ethnicities and cultures who did colonization, who built the colonies. And that it's structured by a very simple friend-enemy distinction that is about expunging influence and expunging memory of that influence. I seem to remember last time we spoke, you mentioned, I think, an Irish colleague who said that you shouldn't be investigating the families because it might complicate the message that they're trying to convey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was very chilling.
I don't know if you see this too.
I can see where your pessimism is coming from. Sure. But, I do think there are people who are seeing it for what it is and are starting to call it out. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm not, I would, of course, there's reason to be worried. But at the same time, I do think that the human spirit is amazing. People soon, get a whiff of what's going down. And dissent is such a natural part of the human condition. So I think that's the saving grace. It's the motor of change.
Yes, I think about that. I think about it, but I know this is an extremely bizarre reference to make, but I was on Twitter the other day and someone shared a little animated GIF of a goose in the middle of a field, standing stock stiff, very brave, and cows were trying to intimidate the goose, but the goose wasn't moving. And the fact of the goose's failure to be intimidated was actually frightening the cows. And I found this extremely interesting because the tiny little thing of goose and these huge bovine animals. And the person wrote a caption for it where they're talking about the strength of will overpowering the forces of nature, something very dramatic like that. And I think very much about.
I can think of a similar one. You're not recording, are you?
I am now. I am now recording. Okay. I'm afraid.
Okay, well then I won't.
No, but I mean, for good or ill, men of great will achieve great things. Whether you're talking about Gandhi or Hitler, I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's for good or bad. A fearless confrontation of society can have enormous effects. Even if you don't win over everybody to your side, you drag even your opponents with you. Just look at what Julius Malema's managed to achieve with his relatively small portion of support in South Africa. That strength of will is totally transformative. The ANC, which has been dragging its heels on transformation since 94, all of a sudden is energized to pursue appropriation without compensation, prescribed assets, all kinds of things. They've even gone as far as to, so now, I mean, I don't think the details matter, but the point is that it is being dragged forward by strong will. And I don't see a lot of that sort of strong will of resistance against decolonization at the moment. Maybe in America under Donald Trump, but I don't see I don't see a lot of replacements for Donald Trump.
I'm glad you said appropriation without compensation rather than expropriation.
Yes. I think the best word for it would be sequestration.
But then sequestration sounds too legal and too conventional and we're working within a legal order.
Well, sequestration means it's arbitrary.
Yes,
you see. Yeah. So but then no, but so I think, look, where do you see sort of any real pushback? Because when I look at academia, I just see a solid wall of determined leftists who have an absolutely presuppositional apologetic position on their historical trajectory.
Um, sure. That's what I'm experiencing
Mm.
and seeing as well. Um, but I think we are already working outside. They don't have the stranglehold that they've had in the past,
Yes, this is true.
and
This is
this is
true.
crucial. This is something we should not forget. So certainly, the opening up of cyberspace means that people can counter this, and it's happening as we talk. And certainly, I work outside of academia because I've just realized that there's no place for me there. I don't feel I've been invited on numerous occasions, and I've realized it's just not the way to go.
Mm.
Especially when you realize that the period that I've been researching has been hardly researched, and they want in, and they've realized that's the academia in South Africa, especially they want in, and of course they want to incorporate one. The whole thing of uh, incorporation, I suppose. Um, by inviting you in and saying, okay, we'll give you a scholarship and come under my wing and I'll mentor you. It's like, I don't need your mentoring at this stage. I'm way past that. What you want is my research, and I'm
Yes.
sure as hell not going to let you get my research and be a free rider at my expense. So
Okay.
this is a big problem where you suddenly realize that you're way ahead of the actual the people that are in the ivory towers,
Mm.
and they've woken up too late. But when it comes to South Africa, yeah, I just don't think we're sophisticated enough to play the game. So maybe that's
Yeah.
another reason why there's hope.
Yeah, no, it's funny you say that. I keep recalling Olive Schreiner's words about what white South Africans are. They said we're a bunch. She said we're a bunch of lower middle class
Middle class
Philistines.
Philistines,
Yes.
yes, without any aristocracy of blood to save them. Brilliant observation.
Yeah, and I think it, but in some ways I kind of like it because it means that it means that we have a stubborn refusal to really be swept along completely into the international currents.
Well,
You
I
know?
was just reading the other day how the whole debate about incorporating COPs into the Afrikaans in mainstream. And now you've got academics who are so-called people of color. As far as I'm concerned,
So,
whites and coloreds are all people of color in South Africa, anyhow, given our history. Our, so anyway, so let's just say formerly classified colored academic who's now in the mainstream, who's now has a greater vocal authority, and coming up with some very scientific looking scheme whereby the language or the Cape dialect can be mainstreamed and brought into the fold.
okay.
But at the same time, I'm sensing that not everyone's going to go along with this because we haven't looked at our history sufficiently to, and whatever we do at this point is always going to end up to be a self-adjusting stuff up. And that gives me hope as well, because the more we try to fix, the more we stuff up. And if we really want to fix, we have to go radical. And then we have to be true to the meaning of radical. We have to get to the roots of the problem.
Yeah, I like that. I find etymology gives you lots of leverage in those
Exactly.
kind of discussions.
This idea of, all anarchists love violence and all radicals are extreme. No. Let's get back to the roots and, let's be radical. But certainly, I think part of the whole problem, what I'm finding with South Africa right now is we are so constrained by constitutional supremacy that we don't even realize the constraints. No
Mm.
one's talking constitutional supremacy. No one's, and if I look at the media,
Okay.
everyone looks to Pierre de Vos to be, the Moses coming
Oh,
down from
but
the
he's the
mountain.
most awful public commentator of the lot. He's an
But,
absolute coward.
well, no one else gets brought in to speak about the Constitution except him, and you
Yeah, well,
must ask yourself
he's
why.
their pet. It's extremely simple. He's a pet intellectual, so he doesn't really have any contrary views on his own. And like all pet intellectuals, he diligently sticks to the bad apples criticism of government, so that you never criticize any of the systems or institutions or goals, but only the few people who stole. And you say, I wonder why this happened. Why is there so much corruption? It's just a tragedy, as if it's it's something in the weather, you know?
Yes.
It's like, oh, these bad apples just keep falling from this tree. I can't understand it. Have you tried cutting the tree down?
These minor irritations of life. But you know, the concept. I remember, for me, a very chilling moment in my campaigning days, shall we say, when I was, you know, after leaving the Foreign Service and then becoming joining the other side as an NGO, and then going to the United Nations and to try and put the indigenous rights issue on the table. But once we had succeeded in getting the government to pay attention. Because basically what happened, right, was we wanted Saartjie Botman to be buried in France, failing that, to be allowed to come home for us to bury her. So the right to burial, which was then linked to the right of indigenous, the right to indigenous rights, the fact that that had been left out of the Constitution. And this was a constitutional argument. It was, the cutoff date was wrong for 1913. It wasn't, there was not sufficient consultation. It wasn't even discussed at CODESA and when CODESA collapsed. So in the post-CODESA, things even became more secretive. So we suddenly were given this constitution, which fell out of the sky. And I remember being in the embassy in Tokyo when we were, you know, at the time of CODESA, we were inundated with telexes saying, what's your latest position on gay rights? What's the position in your in Japan, because, you know, that's where I was based. So each embassy was getting, each mission was getting instructions, you know, feedback. So in the end, this was all part of the copy and paste.
Wait, so you think that in this whole process, do you think that how much input do you think these foreign embassies were having on the process? Because
it
does have a very but it does have such an internationalist flavor to it. Our constitution, it seems so closely in lockstep with the sort of new sustainable development goals and the human rights program of the United Nations.
Exactly. It buys into all that stuff. But the thing is, the Americans love to talk about founding fathers. Perish the thought. Because who are our founding fathers? And this is
a bunch
now
of
my question is who the hell were those so-called legal experts that sat around the table and copy and pasted this disaster of a constitution?
Thieves, murderers, terrorists, racists.
And I have an inkling, because I'll give you an idea of, once I got back from Geneva, I think the third time, finally, central government kind of invited us to attend a Khoisan conference in Pretoria. It wasn't Johannesburg, I can't remember, it's a long time ago. And I was invited to talk, but it turned out that they didn't want me to talk. They wanted me to just be one of the presenters for the other speakers.
So they wanted your signature, they didn't want your handwriting.
That's it. And when I realized that I'd been duped, of course I gave my speech. And that didn't go down very well, because then I had one high-ranking ANC official basically tell me that I should apologize, and I refused. And of course, there was a terrible moment. But what I noticed was that at the opening of the proceedings, we had Elby Sachs come in, give a very quick speech about the Constitution and how it envisaged the possibility of Khoisan incorporation. And then he waltzed out, Matilda, gone.
Yeah.
So he wasn't even there for discussions or Q&A, nothing. And of course, he walked in and the Red Sea parted, and he walked out and the Red Sea parted again. And I thought to myself, so you are Mr. Constitution, clearly.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look...
So I get the impression government always goes back and says, okay, we have a problem. What's your take on this? So we need to identify, we need to out these people who wrote our Constitution, because ultimately they need to explain to us what the hell, was going down there.
I mean, I have a former lecturer who drafted Chapter 11 of the Constitution on defense, and whenever she talked about it, there was a strange tone in her voice where you could tell there was something she regretted but would never enunciate.
Mm-hmm. And then, my next point is our Constitution incorporates social justice rights.
No.
So the big debate between, civic and political rights, and then the move to socio-economic and social justice, which is now embedded in our Constitution, which makes the South African Constitution unique as a written constitution. It's the only one in the world that has all these rights embedded, enshrined.
Yeah,
and suddenly this document becomes a holy document because we use words like enshrine. This is for me, very worrisome when we use that kind of language for a piece of paper. And we call it a final constitution, which it can never be.
But it's interesting because there's a lot of flexibility in that. Now, but it's a specific kind of flexibility. It's sort of like it can flex in one direction. So there was an interesting little sort of like discussion argument type thing between a couple of people on Twitter. There's this young lawyer. No, well, she's not a lawyer yet. She's a law student. Very big on her constitutional. What's the word where you think an originalist? Big on the originalism. So what you would call a constitutional supremacist. But no, I because I sort of pushed back and I got blocked by someone because I said, well, what do we need a codified constitution for? And I sort of joked. I joked offhand, codification is for pussies. But that one didn't go down too well. But England gets along. I mean, look, not that England is evolving in the correct direction, but they do without a codified constitution, as does Israel.
This is what I wanted to also get to. With Brexit, we had they challenged parliamentary sovereignty, and they got back to 1688, and they got back to the Glorious Revolution. And it was once again clarified. And of course, they should never have had to go to court about this in the first place.
The Supreme Court, what an ugly little boil.
Nasty.
That bloody thing is festering with Blairite Fabians.
There you are. So I think the affirmation of parliamentary sovereignty was a turning point in British constitutional history, yet again with Brexit. But it only brought home to me the fact that our constitution was a very, very surprising shift from parliamentary sovereignty to constitutional supremacy. And I don't think South Africa's realized this.
The thing is, it's extremely doctrinaire as well, because people don't really, it's one of those things where people look at social justice and they go, well, we like living in a society and we like justice. So yeah, that's like some good shit, eh?
But social justice as a concept is tautologous.
No, it's not.
It's enough.
No, but think about it. It's when you say social justice, it's justice on the order of the collective. So it's collective redress, which is always, or universally, it's morally wrong. Because the idea of collective punishment is bloody nonsense.
This is insidious because now you've got,
Look, I have a very strong opinion on that. That's where I stand. I think social justice is a concept with clear, defined boundaries, and it is evil.
Well, for me, social justice is particularly pernicious and particularly insidious and invidious for the simple reason that it erodes the presumption of innocence.
There we go.
And I think the presumption of innocence is the most sacred value coming from the Anglo-Saxon world, even though Anglo-Saxon is now discredited as a concept. But coming from the English-speaking world, coming from England, ultimately, this is a very, very important. This is what separates the men from the boys, the wheat from the chaff, when it comes to continental Europe and then the UK. Because you've got the inquisitional style, right, in continental Europe, where you are guilty until proven innocent, which harks back to the Inquisition. So that's built into continental Europe, the psyche of the Europe of the
Yeah, the
continental.
French legal system with its
Horrific,
quasi-inquisitorial thing.
horrific.
Yeah.
After 5 or 6 republics and God knows how many revolutions, we are, that we still take them seriously worries me. But certainly, I think the affirmation of parliamentary sovereignty was very important right now when it happened, but it didn't get any attention in the media. It was just seen as a means to try and prevent Brexit, and everyone was focused on the whole debate whether Brexit should happen or not.
Yeah. And I think there's a very hard there's a very hard point. It's very difficult to reconcile the Anglo-Saxon notion of justice and law with the African sort of remedial model, which
Restorative justice.
yeah, but there's very much more an eye for an eye kind of vibe there, and the idea that it's about making all parties satisfied on a consensus basis. And then if you don't want to go along with the emerging consensus, then you're being divisive. There's an incredibly tyrannical edge to that
Well, that's the
cannot function
inclusivity.
beyond
That's the
small
inclusivity.
communities.
This is
Yeah.
Ramaphosa's favorite thing. I want to include you all. I want to include you all. And the inclusivity ends up ultimately in exclusivity.
Yes.
So there's the absurdity of it all.
But I mean, I think part of this, one of the things that I get, because I don't like using the term decolonization because it has obvious connotations of erasure and persecution that come from it. But there is an aspect to it which I quite like of the digging back into history and sort of pulling the disentangling, which is particularly when I look at African institutions like this. They're designed for small communities where you can meet people face to face and have discussions and confront them in daily life. And it's a very high trust society. And power is based on positive draws, not negative reinforcement. So, if the chief's not doing a good job of mediating between his subjects, people just pick up and leave, and he loses his power and influence. And so, I think in that environment, it's great. Then you have this really lovely, open, low pressure, public choice theory, governance stuff going on. But it doesn't work in modern society where you have, geographic enclosure and high population density and high degrees of wealth and power inequality that naturally emerge in large societies. I can't see how and like the anonymity of large society as well. I don't see how these systems can really cope with it.
Well, I think decolonization by definition points to regression, right? Because you want to try and restore the status quo ante.
Yeah.
And that's a dangerous game because you can't go back. If you do regress, then it means you've got to get back into skins. You have to divest yourself of all the Western trappings. And that's just not going to happen in the modern world.
Yeah.
So what then happens is that you then start, you're not even demystifying, you remystifying indigeneity. And, that's not very helpful because it means you're getting people coming forward saying, I'm a black woman and I'm a storyteller and that everything I say is now valid, even though it's made up and it's based on nothing.
My lived experience, which means that's just like your opinion, man.
Yes, exactly. So, and in the case of South Africa, it becomes more complex because, did we decolonize ourselves in 1932 or 31 with the Statute of Westminster? Did the Anglo-Boer War not, count as an anti-colonial war? So, do the Boers need to be decolonized yet again?
Well, that's Mahmoud Mamdani's little contention is that Afrikaans decolonized itself nationally in in the late 20th century, mid to late 20th century. And he kind of has a point there, but it gives an interesting definition of what decolonization means. So he says that they built this sort of indigenous cultural system with and I'm going to put words in his mouth here, of course, but with some kind of cultural autarky. And it's really interesting in that what he seems to think is appropriate for the rest of South Africa is for there to be an African cultural autarky, but he doesn't, because he's a revolutionary international leftist, he doesn't like promoting local tribal identities. And so what emerges out of his writing, particularly when you look at how he analyzed the way he talks about Frantz Fanon and so on, and Steve Biko and all these, what he really is doing is he's subtly pushing forward this strange black supremacy as an outer skin for orthodox Marxism. And the thing is, I see that kind of pattern very often, not just in people like Mamdani who get a round of applause every time they show up, but from your common or garden academics here. There's very much that sort of like cold, hard, deracinated race consciousness beat that they keep pumping out. And I'm not sure how you could convince people to get around it at this point, or how you point this out to them,
Resistance.
Resistance. So just say, you're the enemy, get out of my way, I'm building my own university.
There has to come a point where people have to say no more. There has to come a saturation point. Certainly.
What would you actually make of the idea of, say, for example, some kind of small historical academic institute outside of the main academia being set up?
I don't know. The danger is that it could just become another institution.
You mean like Robert Conquest's 3 Laws of Institutions?
Yeah. So I'm not sure. The thing is, there'll always be the endless debate about who interprets history, and no one's going to agree, and everyone's going to claim historical sanction at some point to legitimize their position, their present position. So it's always open to abuse. That's the biggest problem with the historical route, I suppose.
Yeah. I think that's sort of the double-edged sword of getting involved in these things, which is that institutions are the carriers of ideas. If you don't build your institutions, other people's ideas get carried forward. But if you do buy institutions, the ideas build institutions, the ideas take on a life of their own.
Yeah. So, I was also hearing some talk about, like the Institute of Race Relations talking about the Battle of Minds. And I thought, this sounds very attractive, but is it realistic? And,
well, they're not really fighting. They're fighting with one hand tied behind their back. And they're sort of saying tepidly, they're sort of saying tepidly, well, pretty please, would you mind awfully giving us a little bit of civil rights? Yeah. And I mean, I agree with them on like the general, many of the things that they propose, but they seem very toothless in the way that they propose them.
Well, the Battle of Minds is also, premised on rationality, on the basis that everyone's going to be rational, and that's not going to happen. It's not happening. So, that's also where William Godwin falls short as an anarchic thinker. In the end, he was hoping that reason would prevail, and it doesn't. Yeah. And we're not in a situation where you can reason with some of these people. They've already silenced you in terms of reason.
Yeah, I mean, look,
So
I have a very sort of weird philosophy on reason and rationality. I mean, you know that old G.K. Chesterton aphorism when he says a madman isn't a man who's lost his reason, but a man who's lost everything but his reason. And so I think that reason is just a faculty people use instrumentally, and it all comes down to what you desire and what you will. And so people who want to cause harm and destruction and persecution will bring it about through, much more effectively if they're clever and have great facilities of rationality. And people who are good-willed will be all the more empowered by their powers of reason. But it all comes down to what people decide. It's choice. Do you actually want to do good? You know.
I was also taken by, the usage of words. For me, words are the window to what people are thinking, right? Especially in any political discourse. And I think we should always hold people to their words, especially when they start repeating the same words ad
Little
nauseum.
mantras.
That's when the alarm bells go, right? And the expression I heard from, this was Dr. Quinton Williams, who was pushing the incorporation or inclusion of an CARPS curriculum into the Afrikaans, mainstream Afrikaans as a language of education. Anyway, so the term he used was capturing of space. We need to capture the space.
Oof. Yes, I hear this one.
That said it all for me, right? So battle of ideas, capturing space. I think capturing space is much more important than battling with ideas.
Yes. I think the thing is that you know, there's that logic of the sort of revanchist response to the apartheid system, you know, where they're trying to sort of enact vengeance on the dead in effigy with the living, and they use exactly the same metaphors and the same barrier sort of concepts and borderlines. And I was there during the Fallist protests when they were all coming up with a whole bunch of new stuff and picking, oh, well, which thinkers are we going to get into? And this is the big sort of like experimental cauldron of decolonization for South Africa. And while I was still part of the conversation, I kept saying to people, look, all you're really doing is taking the apartheid system and tipping it upside down. You haven't changed any of the ideas. You're just inverting them. But no one was interested in this. It was completely perpendicular to their interests. They're not interested in ideas or bringing about a new anything. It's just about revenge.
So, okay, if that is the case, as you experienced it, right, this makes me wonder all the more about, the Constitution that we have, the final one, so-called. I've noticed in some chats recently as well, people are talking about change in terms of the current Constitution. And it baffles me that people still think that they can make it happen, given the fact that socio-economic rights are already entrenched in the Constitution, BEE as well. So basically, white South Africans consented to BEE.
Yeah, because
so to now make a noise about it, it's a little late, sorry to say. And, when it came to voting in the referendum for that final constitution, I know that I voted no because the constitution was faulty. It was full of flaws, and no one was listening because they all saw it as a vote for change, not a vote for a constitution. And that was beautifully played. But my next problem is, we didn't have a revolution. And we still have to come up with a suitable term, I think. Transformation, it doesn't say it enough. But, the nation state of South Africa and its sovereignty was intact and left intact. And we kept the constitutional order. It was never, never terminated.
What, the old one from...
The old one, from the old Republic of South Africa to it was nothing. There was no revolution. Legally, we are still the same nation state. We had a peaceful transition, but it was a peaceful legal transition.
I wouldn't call it peaceful. Important. I mean, sure, but how many people did the ANC murder to gain monopoly on the opposition there?
Well, of course, peaceful in inverted commas, yes, right. Mm-hmm. Right, but there wasn't a civil war, and there wasn't the kind of, I suppose, Sodom and Gomorrah, happening, which had been predicted, right? Everyone thought it was going to end up in violence, but so it was relatively peaceful. But it was a legal transition, and this is crucial. But my problem with that too was, at the time, knowing that the referendum for the Republic was actually flawed as well, because the National Party at the time used the votes of Afrikaners in Southwest Africa, which was technically not part of South Africa, to get their they're small percentage majority for the Republic.
Yeah.
So we then, of course, ended the monarchy in 1961 on a referendum that used the votes of non-South Africans, and it was a whites-only referendum, so two problems. So if we were going to with Codesa and post-Codesa, if we were going to go back to the beginning, technically, legally, we should have gone back to the British Queen being Queen of South Africa. Not a republic, which was an apartheid creation and an illegal one. So,
I mean, but then what they really want to do is they want to push it back further than that, to be honest. So there's a kind of tension there because because
how are they going to do that now?
Yeah, because the tension there, the irresolvable conflict is that they're torn between a desire to return to tradition, pre-European tradition, and a desire for revolutionary utopia. And I mean, that combination always results in fascism or national socialism wherever you look, or some variation thereof. And we're kind of seeing it emerge before our eyes. I mean, the EFF are the most fundamentalist charterist organization in the country. They take the Freedom Charter extremely seriously, and they demand that all of its terms be realized. And, what can you say against that? I mean, that's, as far as I can see, the real constitution behind the constitution that's guiding everything is still the Freedom Charter. Everything is measured, every reform is measured against the Freedom Charter's demands.
So I take it then you don't have faith in the current constitution to protect you.
Oh no, no! I'm on the level of the government is illegitimate and they are occupying my country, and that's where I'm at. So
they are illegitimate and they're occupying your country.
Yes.
Okay, right.
No, I mean, slightly flippantly, I'm joking, but I'm not joking, sure. If that makes any sense.
But, so the nation state of South Africa, which in itself is, a problem. It's a colonial construct.
Yeah.
And so we have to ask ourselves, really, if we're going to decolonize, do we decolonize back to the Union of South Africa or to pre-Union, and that was never discussed at Codesa. And, there I can sympathize with any frustrated Black South African for saying, what the hell, these issues were never discussed. And now we are saddled with this constitution that is, constraining us.
Yeah,
and it's a very complicated constitution. Not because it's smart, because it's a copy-paste job.
Yeah, you got to love the bit where they say, with traditional authorities, and something for traditional authorities, and it's like this little clause that gives no details. They must be recognized. I don't care how. Figure out later. And then Jacob Zuma answers that question firmly and in the affirmative by saying, yes, traditional authorities are authorities. We're going to vest them with all of the powers of the modern state within their hereditary lifetime rule context, which is more power than any traditional rulers ever had in South African history. I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, you have the power. If you're a chief, you have the power of summons across the whole country for anyone who committed an act that's within your jurisdiction. So someone has some quibble with you over something or other. You can say, well, bailiffs, go get him from PE. I want him here in KZN. And I'm going to try him on a law where I will write the new precedent myself, because I'm traditional. It's absolutely extraordinary, and the abuses of power are unbelievable.
And in the Constitution too, have you noticed that the sanctity of life is like number 5 of the main basic rights? It's not even like number 1.
Yeah. Well, I can't imagine the ANC considering life to be of much value after all the blood they spilled. But I'm not sure how much do you see much value in putting the right to life over in the Constitution, as opposed to having, say, just sound laws regarding this kind of thing?
Well, personally, I don't think we need a written constitution. I would rather
Mm.
go the British model, unwritten. And the thing is, when it comes to law and values and rights and privileges and all the rest of it, it should be organic, it should be authentic, it should be grassroots, it should come from the bottom upwards, not from the top downwards. So we
Yeah.
settled with a constitution that was superimposed on us, and it lacks any authenticity.
Yeah. It
So
doesn't
already it's a
recognize how
dead
people
letter.
live.
Yes, it's a dead letter from day one. Thank you, L.B. Sachs et al. Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, some people just wanted to pull it over on the old Nats. They had they figure as long as we poke them in the eye, everything's fine.
But they did keep the core of the country. They kept the legal integrity of the Republic of South Africa, which is very interesting, because I think it could be a possible way of challenging.
Yeah, but
Um,
it's interesting because the solution to that that's being offered by the most powerful and vocal challengers is, generally speaking, one where they say, okay, this is a colonial thing. The way we decolonize is by keeping the shell and just like erasing all of the interior contents and filling it with blood and black paint. So,
well, once again, I'm not too worried. I am worried. Of course, I think things can go horribly wrong and very quickly, but things can also right themselves in the long run. But certainly in this day and age, I think the the white diaspora is not just a white diaspora. Anybody who's qualified is leaving. So whether you black, white, colored, or Indian, everyone's getting out if they can, and they're buying nationalities left, right, and center, or citizenship of other countries, which is for me another very, very unpleasant
it's painful
phenomenon. I
because,
find
I
it really
mean,
sad that people are now, vying for, where can I go and what nationality can I purchase on the market? It's disgusting. There's something really wrong with the world. It's not just South Africa.
yes, and
And then we
there's an
have to,
evaporative cooling effect as well, because take, for example, the NHS in the UK. So what they do is they've got open borders, so now the NHS is overwhelmed. But instead of training their own people to expand the NHS staff, they go and poach third world nurses and doctors. And so what you do is you're watching everything sink everywhere in the world, because there's no love, there's no loyalty, there's no dedication. And I seem to remember, I don't know if you've come across this British fellow called Adam Curtis.
yeah.
So he made a whole series of documentaries. He's a very good investigative journalist in his time, but he's turned more to sort of theory and speculation and so on. But he said something interesting. He says, if you want to see change, you're going to have to make a sacrifice. And he says, you'll know real change is afoot when you see qualified, intelligent, middle-class people giving up their comfortable lives to join some movement. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned at the moment, we still don't have that. Everyone is still trying to scrabble for the last scraps of hope at a stable middle-class life, when that's rapidly receding in a world with chronic inflation, open borders, crumbling institutions.
So we have a situation where events might just overtake the events taking place domestically, right, within South Africa. So we can't leave out the global stage. Things are really happening on a global level, which are impacting on South Africa big time, and on what may happen in the future. So I think one needs to watch that very, very closely.
Oh, yeah.
And then, another thing that's coming back to the collective idea. Why is it that we always think of Europe, North America, and Africa, and black and white, and leave out the Asian equation every single time when we speak about cultural? So why do Asians perform better? Why do they work so hard? They have a work ethic, but they also, they're collectivist, and they have their harmony and their serenity, which comes at one hell of a price.
You bite down on the pain.
Well, a bit of masochism, you know, some people don't mind, right? So yes, but So even when it comes to decolonizing, the role of the collective role can still play a positive part, not necessarily a negative part. I'm just worried that we end up trashing. I'm all for presumption of innocence and individual rights, and very much the Western way of thinking. But certainly, this makes for selfishness, and the American idea, constitutional idea of the pursuit of happiness, I find worrisome, because it does
Yes.
smack of self-gratification.
I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, look, even de Tocqueville, as early as the 19th century, was already making remarks that about America that you recognize now, about the worship of money as the highest form of achievement. I mean, but it's double-sided. He does mention, and it's true, you can still see it today, is how high the local democratic participation is for Americans. Their community participation is still very high, and it is a remarkable thing. I mean, I think there's a great degree to which the big things that formed the nation early on leave deep imprints. I mean, Albion Seed by what's his name? God, I can't remember his name. A big fat book about all the different waves of immigration to America and how they continue to shape institutions centuries since. And I mean, you can look at maps of where people have done little genetic samples, and they can see each wave on the map, and then you compare it to voting patterns, and it's
Yes.
still impacting voting patterns 300 odd years later. I mean, my family have voted for some incarnation of the South African Party for 100 years. SAP, UP, DP, the DA. Some shape of that kind of middle of the road stuff. Generations. And
I'm surprised you DA. I would still put more in the camp of the progressives, and under the influence of the Oppenheimers, but still.
Yeah, no. Look, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. But
quite that, right?
no. Look, the DA currently leaves a bit of a bad taste in my mouth. But they're kind of what we've got. Do you know what I mean? I'd vote for. I personally, my strategy would be when I'm back in South Africa next year. Will be to vote for some fringe party that'll put pressure on the DA to come to their senses.
I don't even vote, you see, because I rejected the referendum, so I don't recognize the Constitution, and I don't recognize the flag. That's my take.
Oh, well, you're much more radical than I am. That's brilliant.
When people ask me, in Japan, where are you from? And I say, well, they tell me that I'm South African, or I'm, my passport.
Oh, to a Japanese person, that must be incredibly confusing.
It's very confusing, but I tell them, this is an imposed nationality. I'm told that I'm South African, so here you are. This little book, this passport defines me. So, really.
So, what would you see yourself as then? Capian or something such?
Well, I think I've gone past this need to self-identify in some kind of definitive way. I mean, I'd rather end up with a vague Eurafrication, tricontinental. That's me. I'm just not prepared to see myself as some hyphenated ethnic. And the more you hyphenate yourself, you're going to end up, being overly hyphenated.
You don't want that. No.
Well, it's nonsense. And watching the African American go from Negro to colored to Afro-American to African American, can't these people make up their goddamn minds as to who they are?
They're very troubled, aren't they? Because I see them a lot, the way that they insert themselves into African political discussions. And there's a lot of this with Louis Farrakhan, who tries to push influence in Cape Town with the Cape Muslims and push a black identity on them. And there's something rather perverse about how Black Americans try to compensate for their own sense of inadequacy by jumping into Africa and telling Black Africans how they're supposed to live. It's just it's like a sort of, it's like a reenactment of Liberia's history in an abstract sense, you know, the black American returning to colonize Africa and boss them around and call them, you know, backwards bush monkeys like they
The
used
Emperor
to.
Jones.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, the Emperor Jones.
Yeah.
Do you know the song Hottentot Potentate?
No, I don't actually.
It's so special because it was composed by Americans and Jewish Americans. So it gets even, you know, it gets all the patinas that it needs to make it really interesting.
The
And
hell?
and it really it's a take on the Emperor Jones, where, you know, basically the Hottentot Potentate says, I've got the power, I'm the man. And you know, how I can make people in the, you know, real Africans cringe, bow, stoop, and fall for me, because, you know, I'm the Hottentot Potentate. It's brilliant, brilliant parody and brilliant satire, and so relevant for now.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a book that I love quite a bit to reference is the symbolism. Just it's so good. Black Mischief by Evelyn Waugh.
Uh-huh.
So I mean, I'm sure you know. I'm sure you know this. It's about a couple of Oxford intellectuals who go down to try and to take over the country of Azania.
Azania, as in I own
Yes,
Azania.
as in
Oh,
Azania.
okay.
No, but here's the thing. At the
Mhm.
time, South Africa wasn't referred to as Azania by
Oh, right.
anyone.
Okay. Mhm.
And Azania is the old ancient Greek word for whatever Cushitic kingdom was south of Somalia. Doesn't exist
Okay.
anymore, right?
Mhm. So basically, also a Swahili word, right? At some point, or meaning
No,
Zanj in Arab. Okay.
Swahili is a Bantu language. The Cushitic languages are an entirely different
Okay,
language
but
family.
Swahili has lots of Arab. It's actually a hybrid language, right? And I would have thought, I think Azanj refers to the Black Country, so it's an Arab word, is it not?
No, it's Greek.
Yeah.
It's from like it's from like a couple hundred years before Christ as well. So pretty old. Um,
I thought it was
but
Azanj, as in Zanzibar, right?
huh.
Okay.
Well, I mean, like, it could be an
Other.
interesting coincidence. But I do know that it's a very old Greek word. So, and I don't think the Arabs were pottering about there at the time. But at any rate, Azania becomes.
But they were the map makers, remember? They weren't pottering, but they were the first map makers. And their
Yeah,
language
yeah,
appears
yeah.
on the map. So this is why I think you should perhaps take it more seriously.
No, well, no, I'll definitely look it up. I haven't even considered that. I mean, this is just me poking about on Wikipedia, so take it with a pinch of salt.
Oh,
Um,
yes. Wikipedia, a means to an
yeah,
end, but yeah, all
yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah. But so the novel itself, the basic premise is that you've got this Prince Seth who decides he wants to overthrow his father, and rule Azania with enlightened ideas that he's gotten from his Western education. And he's accompanied by this sort of like lazy British aristocrat and a bunch of thieving Lebanese businessmen, and they and they set about like reshaping Azania, and it all goes to pot, and eventually everyone gets eaten alive by starving citizens in the street. And Basil returns home, and he's no longer a lithe, humorous young aristocrat. He's a bitter, cynical, and serious young man no one wants to talk to.
A variation on the theme of Utopia Limited, Gilbert and Sullivan, right?
Oh
Mm.
yeah, sure, but I mean,
All the British institutions that get imported holus bolus to the new independent ex-colony, right?
no.
But
But
you know, but honestly, it's sad. Decolonization right now is being thrown about, and but I don't see any ordinary South Africans just having an ordinary conversation about what is decolonization, should it be necessary, if it is a reality, how can they participate in that whole exercise? There's no discussion, there's no debate,
mm,
there's not even clarification of what it means. You know, does it just mean independence and of the colony and a new nation? Nation building was the next thing that was brought in. No one really, they they accepted it, but they never discussed what that entailed.
mm.
And, you know, there's just not enough debate. And I'm not sure if there ever will be any debate. And so the battle of ideas, getting back to the battle of ideas, this worries me the most. That also, you know, you've got me thinking now, you're saying another institute, another, you know, think tank, another group of historians. But it's not enough, really. But
Mm-mm.
certainly, it's probably too late. This is, and there I agree with you in terms of pessimism.
Yeah.
I can't see how it's going to help at this stage. I think it's too far gone.
Yeah.
And so then that requires even more radical reaction. And then we're talking, the radical in the new sense.
Yeah, but I mean that's the deal. You've got to try and find a new place to plant your roots down, or at least find another trellis to lean your vine on, because the the system that we've got at the moment. I mean, in my mind, just watching what's going on now in the Cape with the confrontations between New Age settlers from east of the Fish River telling people who've been there hundreds of years before them that they're the settlers. The absolute upside down Mad Hatter nonsense of it is it's bonkers. And they're doing this, they're like talking about executing people's children. And it's like, and the journalists sit there and go, well, the Brackenfell parents were awfully rude, getting emotional at this, and I'm saying, like, I think that the EFF should be grateful they weren't strung up from the bridges. The emotional restraint that was shown when their children are under threat. I mean, do people have any concept of how an ordinary animal of any species behaves when its children are threatened? It's not even to expect someone in that position to sort of roll over and go, well, let me hear them out. I'm sure that, genocide has its positive angles too. It's absolutely dehumanizing in the most egregious manner. And I'm staggered by the cowardice of most people in the country. Absolutely staggered and outraged by it.
But it's cowardice combined with attrition. And,
Hmm.
attrition is the old American squeeze and freeze.
Hmm.
And, the harder you squeeze, the more pain you feel. And once you accept the pain, then you apply the next pressure. And so you squeeze and so you freeze. And this is what's happening. The only thing is to make people aware of the attrition that's happening and to start responding and reacting.
Yeah, and to say it's unacceptable and you won't
It's
take it anymore.
unacceptable and drawing the line. It's got to reach that point. But clearly, maybe people haven't suffered enough or haven't felt the threat enough to be able to reach that point
I
where
don't
they're
think that's
saying,
true. I think there are plenty of
uh,
people who feel that way. I think the
mhm.
problem is that we have no elites who will stand up. And this is the problem. As you say, nation of lower middle class Philistines. The lower middle class Philistines can say, how dare you, you're racist, you can't say that here, my life has value, but they don't matter. The people who matter, the people whose voices are listened to, are people in academia, people in media, people in government. And those people are being cowardly. Every single nation, every people that exists, in order to live, in order to exert its will and its power, needs a vanguard that is willing to listen to it and articulate its grievances and its desires. And without that elite, they're twisting in the wind.
Well, then Olive Schreiner was right. There's no hope. There is no elite to fall back onto.
Yeah, the problem is when the elites do stick their head above the parapet, they are followed relentlessly by the intelligence services and stalked by party members who will threaten to kill them at every available opportunity. So and so the few people who are out there trying to call bullshit on the whole system are having to be fairly circumspect, because once they step out into the sunlight, they have to step into the whirlwind too.
Well, to expect people to be brave, I suppose, in the modern age, I think that's asking too much. I think this is where you see in countries like Japan and countries like Europe, they've bought into the nanny state and the welfare state, and they want the protection of Big Dada. So
Oh,
they're not going to, they will be cowards from your perspective, and you can't even shake them into a new reality. I don't think that's going to change.
no, I'm not. No, I don't think that those
Mm.
people are going to change until they're threatened with civil war, which, that's going to take another generation at least. But South Africa, the threat is much more tangible. And
What
then
what
the
what
question
I
comes
find
down
worrying
to, are
too.
you loyal to the people, your relatives, for God's sake, who are on the ground, who can't leave?
You can't even trust your own family. We've reached the point now, like in the Holocaust, you've had Jews that were selling their own mothers to avoid going to the chambers themselves, and I'm seeing family leave to the UK, and as far as they're concerned, they've arrived, they've got the British passport. Fuck the family back home in South Africa. This is happening already. So you're not going to have family even caring for family. I think that's asking too much.
Yeah, no, I see it. I see it in the fringes of my own family. I mean, I don't
And I don't,
blame it.
even in the
I don't
ethnic
blame
sense.
them. I
Hmm.
don't blame them for leaving. One thing that I will say, that I can at least say in defense of my extended family, is that we do help each other out getting out of the country. We do help each other out when we arrive, and there is some of that going on. But me, I can't. I'm getting absolutely fed up with sitting outside and watching things burn, and I'm quite frankly, I'm tired of doing nothing. I'm tired of watching things, you know.
Well, what makes me angry then too is if you've got your relatives who have already left, are they not making noises on the other side? That's not helping either. So they
No,
need to be.
they're being quiet. They're being quiet, and they're going about their lives. School teachers, musicians, door-to-door salesmen, whatever they're doing. And
If they left and then took up the cause on the other side because they cared about what they left, I'd have respect for them. But that's not
it is
happening.
no, it isn't.
Mm.
It isn't. It makes me think of, a lot of people like George Soros. I mean, this is a very extreme example, obviously, but here's a man who him and his father faced the Holocaust, but didn't stop being self-hating Jews, and his whole life has been spent pouring money into groups who undermine the existence of Israel.
Mm.
And
Yeah. Well,
absolutely perverse. You watch these people who leave South Africa and say, well, the country's just gone to the dogs, but it's white privilege. You guys just got to suck it up. Hey, sitting from Sweden. Oh no. I think I've got a couple of spots on this interview that I'm going to have to edit out before I publish.
I think you may have to. Yes, yes, yes. But another thing, it's also surprising. What I have noticed, which being on the outside, just
Yeah.
like following events in South Africa from Japan, when I watched the whole Free State gathering, right?
Mm.
What was the town's name? I forget already.
What, cynical?
Cynical, yeah. Was it Cynical?
Mm.
Yes. Um, you are seeing, desperate whites and other, sympathizers who were, black and colored, that joined them, because there were some, right? All getting ready, and but the pathetic side was to actually see some people in old South African Defence Force uniforms and going all military, kind of, putting on a bit of a show. But
Yeah,
in
but
a
that's
sense,
it's LARPing. They're not taking it
it's laughable, because
seriously.
they're also aping they're taking their orders, or they are dancing to the tune of the EFF, what are they called? I can't even think of their name today. The
Yeah, they're playing into
Malema.
the stereotype.
So they're doing the Malema thing. If they can protest, we can protest. This is lame. This is so unoriginal.
And
They're going to have to come up with something different.
do you know what it's also, so there are people in my generation, there are certainly Afrikaners who are very serious about it, but there's a degree of, for a lot of older people in particular, there's a degree of a lack of seriousness, a lack of
Conviction, direction, focus.
how should there's a way I would put it. I would say that investing yourself sincerely and virtuously in some form of resistance against whatever tyrannical prevailing order you think requires a leap of faith. It doesn't require sort of bravado or mere strategy. It requires a spiritual level commitment. And I think that there are not a lot of people who are willing to honestly abandon themselves to it. Even myself, I feel a lot of trepidation about it because I'm aware of the cost.
Well, there's a huge cost, and also, as an English-speaking South African, I mean, it's very hard to suddenly regress into Afrikaner nationalism. I can't do that
No,
personally.
no,
There's
neither
no
could
way that I want
I.
to sing on, in Hoor jy die magtige dreuning, and then, get all going around the Voortrekker Monument. There's no way that I want to be part of
No,
that.
I mean, I'm not. Look, I have Afrikaans roots myself, but I can't see myself as tied to the platteland. I don't feel that in my bones. I mean, I I feel a tie to Afrikanerdom, but it's not the same. It's Cape Afrikaans is not the same, and the Cape is not the Transvaal.
Sure. What also, what I find also, very pathetic, and you use it in the, in the true sense of the word, is seeing, farmers gather to commemorate the killings of other farmers, but all arriving in their buckies, but they're all super squeaky clean 4x4 Japanese models. It doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. It does buy into the WP, Western Province white privilege.
Yeah, no, it's difficult. I mean, the thing
So
is
from a
that
media perspective, anyone watching thinks, who are these people? What are they really? Are they for real?
yeah, no, but the thing is that it allows everyone to maintain that sort of kulak mentality where they say, okay, well, these people are wealthy farmers, and so what they're really doing is they're standing in the way of the peasants' liberation.
Yeah. So that message has to, that perception has to be changed. And it's got to come from Afrikaners or, whites who feel that, they have no future in the land. They have to really think again how they're going to project themselves.
Yeah, but I mean, this is true. The issue is I see a lot of these sort of Afrikaners who can afford to participate. I don't see a lot of the Afrikaners who can't afford to participate taking that gamble anymore, because I think that they either feel like an inevitable sense of doom,
Yes,
or they're sort of just disconnected and they don't hear what's going on. I mean, and I think that there's a lack of, I don't know, I don't know what we need. Certainly there needs to be more bridging of the white and colored communities. We need to sort of
they
we
have to
need to
find each
short
other.
Yeah, we need to find a way of getting over our differences, because
But I do think that there's a geographical fault line that runs through the country, and Northern Cape and Western Cape, basically, you can, if people are prepared to say, okay, if we really have to divide this country, and when there is talk of secession, which I think is, given the supremacy of the Constitution, not going to be easy. It's going to be a long battle, probably will go nowhere. And secession is not a popular thing in international law, as you well know.
no. I mean, I don't.
So
If without Trump, do you think that South Sudan would have ever finished their
exactly. So
journey to
and some
freedom?
countries never get recognized, right? Poor Tibet. How conveniently we have forgotten the plight of the Tibetans, right?
Yeah.
That's no longer, something that people rally around.
Somaliland.
So, but if people are willing to say, okay, Toti Yutu ni fair, this is, historically this you were not on this side, and we're going to move. We are willing to move, but there's going to be we're going to draw the line, and that means fight to the death. That's an Israel option, maybe. I don't know, but that would take that kind of conviction that you're talking about, which I doubt is going to happen, because people have too many conflicting interests.
Yeah, I mean, I think
But the reality of what happened in Indonesia needs to be brought home to South Africans, because the Indos, the Eurasians, were basically forced out of the country, and Molucca was a disaster. The Dutch promised them independence, and they were incorporated into the Republic of Indonesia. They are Christians; they are not Muslims. And of course, a huge amount ended up in the Netherlands, right? You well know this. And then, of course,
yes, the leaders of the leaders of both of the far right parties and the head of the far left party are all Indos.
And so the Bersiap that happened in Indonesia, and the killing that took place during the so-called fight for independence, horrific. The scale of killing and the scale of revenge, and we cannot not forget that. That has to be imprinted on the minds of all South Africans to say, this has happened before, it's going to happen again. It must not happen.
Yeah, I mean,
And
but
we
look,
cannot allow it to happen. So if those values have been eroded, that doesn't augur well at all.
no,
But then I'm also wondering, aren't we still driven, white South Africans and even colored South Africans, I would say, Christians especially, still have a guilt that's kind of built into their DNA, right? Their religious beliefs.
yes.
So certainly, I think that not what's the trigger for this disconnect? That whites are made to feel so guilty about apartheid that they have become ineffective
I
and
think they
ineffectual.
dream of martyrdom. They dream of
But that
showing.
smacks of having a plan at least, or an idea of what they want, and I don't think they even have that.
No, no, it's I think what it is, if I can speak a little bit for some of the young radicals in my generation, is the ritual self-sacrifice that comes from acknowledging demands for revolutionary justice. It's a ritual. It becomes a sort of ritual cleansing, where every time you demand that sacrifice upon by people of your own ethnicity or identity, you absolve yourself of a little more sin. But it's never quite right, because the self-flagellation, you get addicted to the pain, and so you keep doing it, and you make a romance out of your self-induced suffering and advertise it as an attractive quality to potential mates. And the virtue that you advertise within the southern suburbs, it's rather extreme. You can find people who will make strong, impassioned arguments for why, even after you have free education for everyone else, white people should still pay for their education.
Mm.
And so it becomes this extraordinary wave of ego nourishment through demonstrating how much more you're willing to self-efface in the name of proving that you're morally superior. But it's never at a tangible personal cost, because none of them ever believe that it'll really come to pass.
I think white South Africans should really spend more time in Asia, where they'll learn very quickly that no one cares about you, and Asians only care about themselves, their families, and they have a natural sense of exclusion of everyone else,
Mm.
which is very helpful, right, in building the harmony that they have. I don't know, but if you look at when I look at my ancestry, one thing that strikes me, you look at the map and you realize, my God, all the white ancestors come from contested areas of Europe. So I've got people from Alsace-Lorraine, or from the border of France and Flanders, right? French
Uh,
Flanders, Belgian Flanders, Schleswig-Holstein, yeah, Sudetenland, or,
a,
all the other
a
parts of
liminal
Poland.
identity. There you go.
So our whole past is based on people leaving very contested areas and being unwelcome and finding a new home at the tip of Africa. So somehow I can't imagine why we can't deal with that. A few hundred years later, we must be able to say, well, we must learn from this. We must be able to survive, or not
It's
move on again.
Yeah, it's funny what there's this Luxembourgish fellow who I think he's some kind of socialist or something like that, but he has a very peculiar taste in historical narrative, and he writes a lot of folk music based on various events, whether it's like socialist uprisings or workers' uprisings in Europe or things like that. And he'll write like an album with stories about that event. And he did one about Rhodesia.
Wow.
And most of the songs are from the perspective of white Rhodesians. And There's a song with the title "Hate Us and See If We Mind."
Wow. But is that a song that he has traced back to Rhodesia, or is it one
No,
of
no, no.
his?
He writes them
He's written it
himself.
into the.
No,
Oh, right,
he writes
okay.
them himself. It's, and really, really quite very, very, very striking, emotionally cutting insights. He doesn't really spare anyone in his accounts of history, and he makes everything seem extremely tragic. He wrote one about like America and why the America's light has faded, and it is extraordinarily poignant. He goes by the stage name of Rome.
Rome.
Yeah, just Rome, like
R-O-A-M.
no, like the city.
The city, right?
Yeah,
The eternal city.
yeah.
Okay, but Rome, O-A-M, is even more interesting, I think.
Really?
When in Rome, Rome.
Explain. Sorry, I don't know that reference, I'm afraid.
So roaming, right? Rome,
yeah, yeah, okay, yeah. Sorry.
When in Rome, roam around if you must, right? But certainly, yeah. But
so decolonization, we're facing. It seems to me that we're facing, because the word is used like ambiguously, right? So there's decolonization that means the retreat of an occupying force that governs your country.
Yeah.
And
the end and the acquisition of independence, right? So that's
yes.
the literal and the usual sense, textbook sense. But decolonization now is decolonization of the mind. It's the fanon coming in, right? And it's the erasure, the effacement of any trace of coloniality, right? Which is another new buzzword. So I think this has got to be called out. We've got to say where does it stop?
I'll tell you where it
stops.
I'll tell you where it stops. One of my prescribed readings when I was being taught by Thiven Reddy, who's a rather poisonous little dwarf at University of Cape Town. The opening prescribed reading for his course on global political thought was an essay by Susan Buck-Morse. I'm sure you've bumped into her at some point, a critical theory lass, and she wrote this rambling essay about how the fulfillment of the universal teleology of history actually found its perfect realization in the revolution in Haiti.
Ah, Haiti, yes.
And if you understand the symbolism that he's putting forward there, he's obviously saying that the eradication of the white minority, like they did in Haiti, would liberate South Africa from its colonial subjugation and this whole sort of post-colonial order. And in his personal writings, he insists that the invention of the Afrikaans identity was a myth created to justify a sort of false indigeneity. And so white people and Afrikaners are still foreigners to this day in his eyes.
They're still colonialists, right? And they are still settlers.
Yeah. So his term that he likes to hammer on about is a special kind of colonialism. I'm sure you've come across that phrase as well.
Yes. Oh, yes. So somehow we are a unique form of coloniality, right?
Yeah. And so that's quite pervasive. But at the time, I was still in this mindset because I just started leaving my sort of left-wing paradigm, and I was still sort of trying to defend Enlightenment ideas and so on. And he was, and I reacted to this saying, no, but like, you can't really say reason is out of this and this and this. And I picked apart Buck-Morse's essay in a very sort of tame way. I could see which way she was going, but I didn't have the balls to face it directly. So I just picked apart her argument like a good philosophy student, because he said, do a critical reading. And of course, what he really meant by critical reading was, it's critical theory, agree with it.
Yes.
So I got absolutely stumped on that. He gave me he passed me by 1%, and then he called me into his office and he said, "We don't want your opinions here," like very clearly.
Horrific.
And he was saying, and I had to correct. You want to understand how ignorant this gent is? He did a lecture on modernization, and he starts explaining, and the article that he prescribed contradicts him on this comparison. So he does this article on like modernization in Japan, and he says, so the shogun is kind of like the prime minister. And I was like, no, it's not a parliamentary democracy. The shogun is a military leader. I can't believe that these people are drawing a salary. That they can talk such nonsense and be corrected by some ridiculous burnout undergrad in their classrooms. If that's possible, then they shouldn't be teaching. And never mind all of the immoral nonsense that they're pushing. And that's typical for UCT now.
Good God.
Yeah, that's typical. I mean, my goodness, you should see what's been happening to the linguistics department. Your hair would fall out if you heard the stories. It doesn't even bear thinking about. But
well, it bears writing about and talking about.
Yeah, I think I'll interview an old friend of mine from the department at some point and see what he has to. Actually, you know what? He'd have to leave the department first, because I think he'd get into trouble by talking about it. But
unless he chooses to get into trouble and make a song and dance of it, because it's the time to.
It's the season.
It's the season to start, calling out and fighting back. And I think a lot of people want to know what really happens. The arcane workings of UCT. Myself included, we have no idea what's been going down there.
Oh yeah, can you believe that recently they had a big blowout against Mamakeli Pakeng because she was insufficiently radical. This is the woman who defended Masiqale Mlandu's thesis, "One Settler, One Bullet," that whole thing. Three guesses who his thesis supervisor was. Yeah. Even ready. The guy supervises this thing and says, genocide, solution to the white settler colonial problem. Full marks.
Good God.
Yeah. Literally signs off the guy literally signs off his thesis with bold full caps, "One settler, one bullet." Post this online, and the VC says, "Well done. I want to congratulate you on such a brilliant thesis." And then someone criticizes in the media. How safe do you have to feel that you can congratulate the person on that? And then like the media criticizes and say, well, we wouldn't really want to condone genocide, but everyone's free to their opinion. And as if you can imagine for a second a white person saying, well, I mean, what happened to Helen Zille when she said that, well, there may be some institutions that we inherited from Europe that are actually worth preserving. Ooh, colonial apologism. Heaven forfend, this person should be buried under the jail. Mm-hmm. And, the News 24, they published a rebuttal to their own criticism of Pakeng's remarks by Mcebo Dlamini, the guy who said that Hitler presents the solution to South Africa's problems. This is normal now. This is the normality, and we're pretending this is okay.
And the German ambassador was quiet about that.
Of course they were. White South Africans aren't human beings, for crying out loud.
The last German ambassador, I don't know if he's still the current one, but he was quite vocal in the media.
Ooh, I had a funny moment. So I was at one of these things towards the end of my degree when I was still desperately trying to get internships. So I go to one of these like late night things where you have like a whole bunch of students in like shiny suits and satin dresses, and we all they're all pretending they're very adults, sipping their cocktails and listening to the Danish ambassador give a speech about this, that, and the other.
Anita.
Yeah.
Or
Danish.
SIDA. Swedish, SIDA is in French, le sida is AIDS, right? With an
Yeah.
S.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Swedish, what is it? International Development Agency, SIDA. Very unfortunate acronym.
Yeah, they really are. But so the Danish ambassador, he gives his chat. I go up to him afterwards and I say, listen, because I say, okay, this is now an opportunity to get some real attention from a serious person. Say, look, this is what's going on in my country. They're really talking about it. Like everyone's talking about doing this kind of stuff in the country. And he says, well, yes, that is very concerning. I'll definitely keep my eye on it. And you could tell, like, well, I'm a diplomat. I've got other jobs to do. I'm not going to mention this. This is just going to make too many waves. Leave it be. Next week, Zinzi Mandela, the South African ambassador to Denmark, comes out and basically says, genocide time.
Yeah.
So I don't know what he was thinking or what he's been thinking in his private moments, but he certainly can't have dismissed that conversation with me after that.
Oh no, the thing is, he's got to respect the nation-state cordiality
Of
that
course.
exists, and his loyalty is to his government and to the government where he is representing his country.
Absolutely. But I remember when you read about the Turkish genocide of the Armenians, all of the information that we have about that comes from reports by German and British and French ambassadors to Turkey, because the Turks have successfully destroyed a vast amount of records. They've even gone into tombs and ground the bones into dust. So for what it's worth, if one diplomatic circle, one person takes it seriously enough, then we stand a chance of people paying attention when things start kicking off.
Well, certainly, I mean, at least you try to talk to him.
Yeah.
Not doing anything is not going to help at all. So it's an attempt, and every attempt helps too, maybe.
No, it's definitely true. I mean, I've got I don't have a lot of high contacts, but I have a couple of people who might have influence over here that I try to talk to from time to time. But you can't. These people have their own lives, and they live in soft, cuddly la la land here in the Netherlands. And so, if you bug them all the time and say doom is coming, they'll go, okay, take a step back.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. This is the
So,
problem. Mm-hmm.
yeah, who do you warn? Who do you call? There are no Ghostbusters, You're going to have to deal with your own demons.
Even with the chance to go on the net and to talk, and have your echo chambers, there's too much people who are thinking, who are just talking in circles, and that doesn't help either.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been trying to reach out to people who aren't heard in the circle. I mean, so you have the usual culprits that people go on and they pick narratives from the international community, okay? And they'll say, "Oh, look what's topical now. We've got COVID, we've got Trump," and I'm just saying, okay, well, being a good Adam Smith reader, pursuing comparative advantage, and the viewership is narrow at the moment, but I'm focusing on things that are pertinent to the Cape, and I'm focusing on things that are pertinent to the ethnic tensions in South Africa. And
why have you
hopefully by doing
focused
so,
on the Cape particularly?
because I kind of support Cape independence, to be perfectly honest, whatever slim chance there is. And I figure that by building a sort of increased background knowledge of the Cape, you get people a greater sense of cohesion and a greater sense of community, of shared heritage. It's kind of why I called you the first time, is because your whole project really does knit everything together so beautifully. And
well, that's maybe it's over the years and the feeling of desperation. The only way I see forward is to regress into capedom, because that's what defines me the most and defines the people that I care about. And in terms of identity and belonging, that's all that matters, when all is said and done. And I think, just trying to dredge the historical record has been very rewarding. I just wish that it hadn't been so lonely for so many years. I've had so much resistance. I've had unbelievable resistance from people in the the academia. It's incredible. I've even had colored um, academics say to me, "Oh, what's the name of your Khoi ancestor? I will see if I can look it up for you. You whites have had enough access to the records."
Well, we're so degenerate. We couldn't possibly recognize. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Like we can't read books. Bloody hell, man! We brought writing to the continent. Sorry.
And then when I took a train, the first female convict at the Cape. When I tried to get her published, I was blocked by UWC and by the people that were the upcoming.
You're blocked. How?
Oh yes.
Wait, how many years ago was this?
Oh, we're talking 1995, 96.
Oh, right. So there's no opportunities for self-publishing, of course.
Yeah. Well, I did. I self-published I turned a newsletter into a journal for the Genealogical Society of the Western Cape, and then I published. So I got around the problem that way.
Okay.
Oh yes. So
have you managed to compile and reprint this since?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Which book would that be?
So now it's on my blog.
Okay, good.
And also it's on First 50 Years, the project. So the full research is there.
Okay.
So I can send you the link. It's very interesting. But that was blocked for a long time. But the satisfaction of actually being able to finally get it out there, where now she's already been given the Order of the Dizer. I mean, without consultation. But it's great. It tells me that even the long, slow process makes a difference, because people know and people are talking and it's amazing how people latch onto things. I mean, the gullibility is frightening, of course, but it's not just gullibility. I mean, there are people who are thinking and people who are seeing and hearing, and they are taking the new information on board in their own way. But it does set the scene. And I think it just has, if that could be happening on a grander scale, it would be great. It would help. Because if South Africans if Cape Carpenars, the people of the Cape start really asking themselves, who are we, what are we, why are we, and they start taking their history seriously, it will give them a lot more emotional grounds for taking a stand. I do think it would help. And it lends itself towards authenticity, which is sadly lacking.
Yeah.
And I think authenticity is very, very important for any conviction or any ideology. In the long run, can't work, but authenticity will.
It's interesting you say that. There's an Italian philosopher called so I can't remember his first name. It's Michael Statter. And he was a young fellow, and he was absolutely prolific, but he killed himself at 23. So very, very brief career. But he wrote this. His big sort of magnum opus was something called Persuasion and Rhetoric. And he says that there's two forms of human communication in society. And this is a very crude chopping down of what he said, but basically there's this idea that there's rhetoric, which is these big ideological things, these very sort of reason-bound sort of barriers and linguistic weapons that we use. And then there's persuasion. And persuasion is not about the ideology or slogans that you use like magic spells. You're saying, look, I'm a human being. I have certain needs, and I know that they conflict with some other needs in society. I just want to negotiate this honestly with everyone else and find recognition for my normal human needs. And that distinction for me is quite a potent one.
It's very potent. Yes, that works for me absolutely. I told you the last time when we were talking about Klaasje van Angola, the slave woman that was taken as the fruitvrouw, as the midwife across 2 oceans, and how she got back to Cape Town and she basically got her freedom, insisted on it, got her freedom, and then went back on that and moved back into the slave lodge.
Yeah.
And, you know, the question of why would she give up this precious thing called freedom? And I can answer that. I've been sitting on this for a long time thinking, why would she do that? Why? This is, nobody does that. Freedom is precious because that's part of our ideological makeup in terms of liberalism and Western thinking, right? Freedom is everything. And even, politically, people, somehow we are conditioned to believe that freedom is the answer or the best thing to want. But I remember coming back from Korea and, I was hospitalized and I ended up having to, with no medical aid, I found myself at the Helen Joseph, also waiting in line with all the rest of my fellow black compatriots, being the only whitey in the long lines waiting for my free medication. And I remember waiting hours and hours and looking at the patience of all these people, the patience of the patients, and talking to them as we all waited to get our hand out. And of course, observing usually rather large, empowered black women behind a glass screen dishing out the medication, but talking on their cell phones and basically saying, come up to my window when I call your name and grovel, bow, stoop, and fall, and I might just give you your medication, and playing the power game. And sitting there and watching this one after the other, each person being dehumanized, while a sign on the wall was saying, you have the right to free medicine, you have the right to health, all the constitutional promises from the preamble, and thinking to myself, is this the freedom I want? No, thank you. So I think I've answered my question now, why she would have chosen to relinquish her freedom.
Yeah, because freedom by someone else's standards is never really, it's never really freedom, is it?
Yeah. And also one thing I wanted to mention, watch the space. I'm almost finished. I'm working.
Okay.
How well acquainted are you with the Barbier rebellion?
I don't know about it at all. I'm sorry.
Okay.
You're going to have to.
All right.
I can be terribly ignorant about these things.
Are you an Andre Brink fan?
Not really. I tried to.
Good. I'm not either. I think he's an awful writer, like Nadine Gordimer. No time for them. I think he's. The thing is, just a bit of background. So Etienne Barbier was a Frenchman in the 1730s who kind of, he was a bit of a maverick, and he was in the garrison and he didn't like his commanding officer, who was German, and, lots of slander and libels. So he was rapped over the knuckles. He was disgruntled and he was punished. So he fled into the interior. And then he tapped into the frontier. The frontiers, he found amongst the people he was hiding their own disgruntled state of what's happening on the frontier, with the Bushmen stealing all the livestock and the commandos going out, and of course the Dutch East India Company not doing enough to protect the freeburgers. So he took it upon himself to concoct a petition, which he nailed to the Drakenstein church door, a la Martin King. And of course, in the end, he gets caught, and his body gets drawn and quartered and put on display as a deterrent. And all the frontiers, what's interesting is that his followers end up being quite related, very interrelated, one family almost. And they sell out to the company ultimately. But what you also see inside the VOC at the time, the governor gets changed. The old governor is old school. The company has got a policy to protect the indigenes, and he's playing it by the book. But his successor is the first Cape-born governor, who of course is persuaded to also encourage more commandos and more land grabbing. So in the petition, which I've just translated finally, he spells out the land grabbing question. So this is very topical for now, as you can well imagine.
Okay.
But Brunk wrote about Barbier, but he romanticizes him almost like a Don Quixote, and a bit of a,
Like a foolish lunatic tilting at windmills.
yes. And of course, he based all his, well, he used the research of Nigel Penn, who's of course at the Department of History at UCT. And Nigel Penn's a good guy and a good researcher. And for UCT, of all the historians there, I would say he's the best. I do respect his work, and but being an academic, and it was one of his earlier pieces. He fell into the trap of, this is the fashion to talk about Hobsbawm and social banditry. So I'm looking for a social bandit. Barbier fits the profile. Let's write about him. So of course the research is ideologized, right? He hasn't looked at it from the other side, and he hasn't exhausted the written record. So it's flawed. It's very superficial and doesn't cover a lot of aspects either. And of course, Brunk piggybacks on that and does his novel, and of course gets his fame as a great writer of South Africa, and the French love him, and so continues. So the Barbier story has to be, I think we need to look at it again, and that's what I'm doing. So this is why I'm all in favor of revisionism.
Yeah, as long as it actually brings new information to light.
Yes, but the good thing is, I say write, research, publish, so that I can follow up and challenge you again, because the story's not, the story is not yet over.
What exactly did his petition contain?
It was basically grievances that the ruling elite had, become land grabbers in their own right, and they were not being transparent in their actions, and there was no legal grounds for their behavior. And of course, they claimed that there were legal grounds, but these were not being brought to the attention of the Cape-born people, of the inhabitants of the colony. And of course, the problem too was, with the Bushman raids and the cattle being stolen, they were being impoverished, and they were getting no help from the company. So you've got that problem.
So it's kind of like an abandonment.
Yes.
The settlers were abandoned by the company men.
But these frontier guys are mostly youngsters. They are disgruntled because they can't marry and get their own farms, because the land is being grabbed by the land grabbers. And they're basically saying, well, we've been dumped here. We should be entitled to more land. But of course, the land grabbing is all about supplying meat to the company, and everyone's getting rich on that. And of course, some of the freeburgers who have connections with the officials and are intermarried with the officials, who are part of the Council of Policy, they are accumulating all the land for themselves. And they are forcing these youngsters to be knechts, or to be, farm managers on their farms. So you're seeing this, like, we want our freedom, we want our right to exist, our right to work, our right to have our own place, that, like you have, etc. And so insisting on a certain kind of equality as well. So yeah, lots of avenues to investigate. But even the petition itself has been written off as badly written by, some crazy Frenchman. Actually not. I think it's from a legal perspective, and even from the Dutch language perspective, it's very impressive, considering that they could come up with such a petition. Very, very interesting. And, it was transcribed by Thiel, as you know, the Imperial Canadian-born South African historian. But no one's really translated, even done an English translation of it, as far as I know. And maybe Nigel Penn has done so, but I'm happy that I haven't looked at his work, because I want to research this and give my own spin on this. And, I don't want to be contaminated by his social banditry ideas. I certainly don't see this man just as a social bandit. He's more than that.
Yeah. What do you make of Hobsbawm's approach in general? Because I mean, I haven't taken the time to actually seriously look at him, but I know his reputation a little bit. Generally speaking, as a very, very prolific and respected historian, but one with a very distinctly left-wing
Foucault. I mean, Foucault. Foucault.
Foucault, yeah.
Foucault. Foucault. Is it Foucault in French? The pronunciation, or was it
It's
Foucault?
Foucault. Yeah.
It's a silent L, is it? Okay, well,
Yeah.
it could be Foucault.
Yeah, well, he hasn't
But
exactly got Foucault to say, but
but I think Foucault is yeah, he's one of the followers of Foucault, right? Hobsbawm. So he was all the rage at that time when Nigel Penn was penning his biography on Barbier. So I think the passage of time has given us a new space which needs to be captured, and I'm doing that. And I'm,
new
you know, I'm
space that needs
trying
to be
really hard to
captured.
say, hey, South Africans, here's a story which you think you know about, you read about in Brunk's novel, you don't quite know that it was actually based on someone other historians' research, but here, let's look at it again and let's see what has been left out or what has been glossed
So
over.
we need a new Barbier declaration.
Yes, absolutely. But I think this becomes so important, and for me, the important part too is like, here's his petition. Read it for yourself. This was never made available, even when it was originally penned. When the research was done by Nigel Penn. Like, let's read the thing for ourselves and see what it's about.
No,
We don't
very
need
good.
you to interpret for us. Let's show us the actual document.
So you have a copy of it, and you've done a translation.
I've done a translation, yes. And, unfortunately, I'm not in Cape Town, but if I would do anything to be in Cape Town right now to follow up on a few things that I've uncovered since. But certainly, this is a preliminary start. I just want, the thing is, the reason why I revisited Barbier is I discovered that he was linked to a more important person that I have been researching, and that is the first Boer who undergoes the Namakwa initiation. And I don't know if you know about the Pisplechtigheid. So that's where all the old men urinate on the person being initiated.
Wow, I hadn't come across that one. I knew that I know like of a few rather colorful ceremonies in native South Africa, but
Okay, well, no, this
that
is a
one I
very
didn't know.
well-known one. It's known as the Pisplechtigheid. And Kami, it's got we have the original name too. We have some wonderful correspondence between Swellengebel, the governor, Cape born, and whose son ends up at Utrecht Cathedral and dies a bachelor, very interestingly, but comes to South Africa as well, where he was born, but does a tour into the interior. But he and Hendrik Klute of Constantia have a correspondence, and they very, they kind of enjoy the prurience of describing this Pisplechtigheid in detail. And of course, Willem Namakwa, who's a Van Wyk, and the Van Wyk Busters, he's the reason why the Van Wyk Busters went into Namibia. He's the founding father of these people. And Willem Namakwa was very closely connected to Barbier. And that didn't come out in the original story. So that for me is, very, very important to show the link between them, Willem Namakwa. So that was the reason why I had to go and revisit the whole Barbier story. Because I didn't want to go there because, like everyone else, it's been done. So, there's nothing new to uncover. I've learned my lesson many a time, like all the more reason to go back and revisit.
Yeah, I mean, look, how many biographies of Stalin were written before Kotkin did his version?
Exactly.
And yeah, I mean, honestly, I'd feel daunted even if I was a lot smarter than I am, I'd feel very daunted challenging Kotkin on Stalin. But it's never over. There's always something else to.
Exactly, and I think I'm hoping that if this, that once I get it out there, it might just in some small way plant a seed of discussion. And people, and who knows, even other people who might challenge me or take up more research and take it further. But certainly, it's so important for what's happening in the country right now.
Yeah, I mean, because I think it's starting to leak into the sort of common mind now, the decolonisation thing, and I've seen it in, that Facebook group, the Cape History Facebook group, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cape Town History, I think.
Cape Town History Group, yes.
Yeah. There was a thing they posted recently with some like early 30s colored woman who's getting extremely bitter and twisted and emotional about like a couple of features of her own history, and she said, "Oh, they made us give up our land in exchange for alcohol, and they pulled all our teeth out. We had to pull our teeth out so we wouldn't be taken as slaves because they used teeth as a measure of." And I did like 30 seconds of Googling, and I found like a complete contradiction of this. It's like, no, the cape was purchased for 4,000 reals, and the teeth were extracted. All of the first deliberately extracted teeth in the area can be found in fossils from 500 AD. So, and it takes no effort whatsoever. But instead, you go on rumors that you find in obscure Facebook groups, and you spread blood libel against your fellow countrymen.
Yeah, yeah. It's got to be challenged. So, the only person who's doing this, who's very vocal, and this worries me, is Millet. I don't know if you've been following Millet's The Lie of 1652.
Wait. So that you mean that book, that big
Yes.
fat book? I haven't read it yet because I feel at the moment I can tell that it's going to be something I'm going to grind my teeth at,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not ready for it yet.
Well, I haven't seen it, but I can tell you now that he's a heritage. I almost said heretic, heritage activist, and come historian, and that should already tell you that this is polemic. It's a work of polemic and
Yeah.
nothing more.
No,
And
but
of
I could
course,
tell.
and he's
It's got
relying
those sort of
heavily
materialist Gnostic overtones, already,
already.
raging against the demiurge, and
That's right. But relying heavily on secondary sources, which are all mostly white historians anyhow. So there's a horrible irony there.
You gotta love it. You gotta love it. It's like the white man's history can't be trusted, except the white men who say what I want them to say.
This is where it's becoming absurd. We're back to the absurdity of it all. So I think the absurdity needs to be pointed out. That's all. The more it's spoken, the more discussion, the more writing. And in my case, I think you can't move mountains, but you can do what you do and do it well in your own small way. And each person who's got something to contribute in their own way should be doing what they should be doing. I'm already, at that stage of my life where I think, this is what I do best. So let me do it while I can. And hopefully that'll help. But without making it some political cause, because, I don't have time for that. The research alone is, so time consuming and so difficult that I don't have time for polemics. And I'm not interested in trying to polemicize my research.
Because also you never know what you really what stories you really should be telling until they're found. And I think that's the sort of arse backwards character of decolonization. Is this: look, we're going to revise history with an intended narrative that we've already constructed before we look at the material, instead of going, well, let's see what's out there and then decide what needs to be resurrected.
Yes.
And it's
so how to stem that tide, which is really going to be hard.
Yeah. I mean, look, that's the thing, is it's intellectual dishonesty, and it goes back to the whole thing of like, well, reason is an instrument of will. So it's the use of instrumental reason in service of pernicious goals. How do you convince someone with pernicious goals to want to do something righteous again?
Yeah.
How do you persuade them? This is the conundrum of our time.
That's the conundrum of our times, yeah. And I really don't have the answer for that, except to hopefully, counter it by just producing and, churning out, but not churning out good stuff, the real stuff.
Yeah, add a little grease to the runway at the very least,
And, the thing is, if it is authentic, it's very hard to discount then. And that's the only safeguard that I have in terms of my research.
Okay, yeah. No, that's excellent. Well, thanks for coming on. I think that rounds out the discussion on decolonization quite neatly.
Well, all I can say is, I'm just enjoying the luxury of being in Japan and looking at South Africa from a distance, with Bette Midler and God watching on, and thinking, God,
Bette Midler?
Well, do you remember she had that horrible song called God is Watching? So yeah, it was horrible. I mean, everyone loved this song to death, and unfortunately, it's scarred me for life.
Well, there's no accounting for taste, is there?
Well, this is the lower middle class Philistinism of white English speaking South Africans, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, don't you remember that song? You have to play it. It's a classic. And she says, God is watching. So I always say, we've got to have Bette Midler and God watching, and then we are fine. Everything will be fine.
Yeah, but it's like I always feel on some level that there are a lot of religious platitudes where you listen to them and you go, well, yeah, but okay, that's great, but then what do I do with that information?